it looks like that this was an election that, by and large, vindicated prediction markets.
Prediction markets are clearly among the big winners. There's no question about that. In fact, we just within the last couple hours, we got the latest Luckbox letter. It's a weekly digital magazine that we send out, and we cover prediction markets in every issue. And of course, that's free at getluckbox.com. You can sign up to receive it every Thursday in your inbox. And we were a little late today. We were waiting to see if the Fed did anything dramatic. We didn't expect that they would, but as soon as quarter basis point came out, we dropped the letter, and we included some of the winners and losers that are pretty apparent. And among them was clearly Kalshi, and prediction markets. We focus on Kalshi because it's the only market in the U.S. that you can trade. Poly market, though, has really obviously had some extraordinary days. I reached out to the CEO who you had on the election night special, Tarek Mansour, Kalshi co-founder and CEO. I reached out to him today just to check in how things went and what trading volume looked like, and he shared that information, and we shared that in the letter, and that's something we can talk about today as well.
Sure. I mean, let's talk about the winners here, though. There were a few people that were winners as far as we're concerned that were involved in not just the prediction market, but we have to give a special round of applause to, I suppose, our guest, Robert Cahaley, who accurately predicted that Trump was going to win the swing states here. The one swing state that he didn't pull was Nevada, of course. That's right. But that didn't really matter. Trump's well past that, even if those votes are still being counted. The losers, of course, we seem to think are traditional media, are the pollsters here. I can't think of someone who may be having a worse few days than Ann Seltzer, whose poll over the weekend really shook up the race. I mean, we talked about that on Tuesday, how we were watching to see if that carried any weight through the northern tier of states, and it ultimately did not. So, Jeff, let's talk macro here for a second.
The Seltzer's Iowa poll, I think, baffles everybody because when it was first printed, it looked like an outlier, but obviously, the media jumped onto it because it was a great sign for the Harris campaign, and but it appeared to be an outlier right at the outset, and it just baffles me. I'm looking forward to hearing the backstory as to how that poll came to be, why that was dropped, and I think there's a real lesson for pollsters. But overall, right, we have to look at how, and Nate Silver spoke to this many times, that there appeared to be herding going on, that pollsters were reluctant to show any outliers, except for Ann Seltzer. So maybe all the other pollsters had the right instinct. Stick with the crowd. Don't be an outlier. At least you don't have egg on your face. But they ended up with egg on their face. You're right. Other than Atlas Intel and Trafalgar, most of the polling groups were nowhere close to the result of the election.
They were not close. Yeah. Now, there was one kind of poll that really caught my attention as it pertained to betting markets, because it goes to the discussion of the whale that was in the market we talked about a few weeks ago. You know what? Before we get there, let's just put a pin in this conversation so we can wrap up this discussion about the betting markets on election night.
Sure.
Jeff, in this edition of Luckbox magazine, you mentioned that Tariq Mansour, he was on with us for the election unspecial. Him and Tom had a great conversation. I would encourage everyone to go check out that archive on tastylive.com, or more importantly, come to our YouTube page and check it out. Here, he gave us some really good data, interesting data to talk about what happened. Walk us through it.
Yeah. It was a quick conversation I had with him, and it was really, look, it was clear there was an influx, and I wasn't sure that they were going to share our numbers because firms are typically proprietary about that kind of information. But he did say that he had 58,000 traders alone that came on November 5th in one day. There were 138,000 plus active traders on election night. And remember, this is a platform that essentially would have 5,000, 3,000 active traders, a month previously at best, and more than 900 million. He also mentioned that there was 350 million in open interest. I don't think I published that, but that the platform hosted 614 different markets. My real question to him was, he had a great night. And by the way, they did have a great night. Operationally, they avoided the pitfalls that Predictit had gone through on prior election nights, in general elections and in midterms. They never froze. Orders, there was no latency on the ordering process. Everything functioned very, very well. So hat tip to their tech team on that. But the real question then is, all right, so you've got a lot of money sitting over Kalshi now. And there's obviously, there were winners and there were losers. But there's a lot of cash sitting there earning 4% interest, which they recently launched. What's next? What comes ahead? And he gave an indication of what to look for in that conversation today. He said, look for markets on cabinet appointments. They're launching them shortly. I expect we'll see those within a week's time at the latest. Who will be appointed to Treasury Secretary, Health Human Services, to the UN as ambassador, et cetera, going down the list of cabinet appointments. So that's one of the things he said to look for. They've been doing Federal Reserve interest rate markets for some time and climate markets as well. But I think with Trump and the decisions he's likely to make in the coming weeks, there's still going to be a lot of activity on the Kalshi marketplace and a lot of markets. Not to mention there's some open markets right now that haven't been resolved. A moment ago, I was just looking closely at the house market, which is, of course, unresolved. That's the biggest game in town right now. The GOP is closing in on the 218 seats that are required to win the House. At last count right now, they're at 213. So I was, that's a high probability bet. I think it's 94 cents. Where is it? Yep, 94 cents right now over on Kalshi. Not a lot of return left there, but it's extremely high probability that trend is working in their direction. One of the more interesting markets on Kalshi right now is the margin of victory market. This is the one I'm going to dig into a little bit deeper after we get off the air today and likely do something there. The margin of victory in the House, meaning by seats, will it be, you can see the tranches if you open that up. That's a popular vote margin of victory. But how many seats are they going to win by? Right now, it's equally divided between, I think it's 1 to 5, and the other one is 6 to 10, or 1 to 4 and 5 to 10, with about a 50% odds on both of those outcomes. Oh, in fact, it just turned within the last half hour before I looked at it. So the trend looks to be in favor of the 6 to 10 market. That's pretty interesting. Have to dig on a little bit deeper on that, but that's going to be a fast trending market. And as soon as another seat drops, or another couple seats drop, I think that market will start trending. And that was basically how I ended up with a very successful night on election night. I must have placed 100 plus trades, had a well over 90% winning rate. The only thing I think I lost on was, that I recall, was I thought Harris was going to win the popular vote and Trump would win the Electoral College. Didn't turn out that way at all. But there was a moment, and you and I talked about this offline, and I'd like to share it. There was this moment in a viral clip that's going around that many, many people have seen, where Jake Tapper was speaking to the guy working the board. I forget who it is, the white-haired guy.
John King, yeah.
John King on CNN. And he asked the question, well, show me the counties where Harris is outperforming. And the outperforming is Joe Biden in 2020. And he revealed the map, not a single county. And you could hear Tapper say, nothing, not a single county. That was early in the evening when that came out. And at that point, it was so clear. I had done what we talked about by looking at the swing counties of Boone and Clark in Kentucky and swing counties in Indiana. And they did show early indication. The best early indication of the night came from Georgia with the voter analysis that was done on Fox, their exit polling analysis. It clearly pointed to a trend that was going to be unstoppable across the country. And the simple pattern at that point, once John King did that reveal of no counties where there was Biden outperformance, was to buy any market where Trump was still at 70 or 80 cents, that still had some upside, and trying to get out at 95 to 97 cents. So you had your cash on the side. Turned out to be a good strategy. And I know many people had a very good evening.
One of the things that's really fascinating about how this is all shaken out is quite frankly what happens next. We already talked about the structure of the betting markets and new trades that are coming on here. But in hindsight, it seems like there were some pretty obvious signs that were missed that this election was going to turn out the way that it was going to turn out. One of the more interesting pieces of data that I've come across today is the fact that for the first time since World War II, every incumbent party in Western democracies did not win re-election. It's the first time that it's happened since we had the American-led world order, Pax Americana, since 1945. Now, why is that the case? There's a great chart. There's a great chart out there that's been circulated by T.S. Lombard's chief macro strategist, Daria Parkins, and economists and everyone saying, well, inflation's under control. It's about 2.5% now. That's what economists and financial markets care about. Voters are still thinking about the 20 or 30% surge in grocery prices from 2022. And so political powers or political parties that were in power in 2022, they were all swept out in the Western world this year. The U.S. elections are the last round of those elections that we're watching. No incumbents won. And that was a really significant structural disadvantage that Kamala Harris faced. It's one of the reasons why Joe Biden dropped out. But Jeff, this is now a new world. You have a Republican trifecta moving forward. I think that's also one of my misses here this cycle. When we looked at the polling, we saw a close race. It still looked like it could be a split Congress. Republican trifecta was up there as a possibility if Trump won for the down ballot pull forward, and it ultimately came through. So some signs that we could have seen on the wall, looking at the macro picture, absolutely were missed. But nevertheless, it was a good night.
Yeah,
it was pretty clear, like you said.
And that's a great point. And by the way, the process you just articulated is outlined in the book Super Forecasters, which is an extraordinary book that any prediction market bettor should certainly read. And it's called doing a postmortem, on what did I miss? What should I have seen? Right. I'll talk about what I missed was, or what I relied a little bit too heavily on to get the popular vote wrong, was the polling. I'm a fan of Nate Silver. I appreciate his work. I think Nate Silver ended up doing a pretty good job by saying, Absolutely. That this was going to be a very close election and there was no clear indicator. But the most compelling data, and we spoke about it on this show, what tilted me towards a Trump outcome and a GOP outcome, and it's not political ideology for what it's worth, and I've been asked many times since I've been doing this show, et cetera, and I don't mind saying, I live in Illinois. I've lived in Illinois for the last 30 years. I have voted third party in Illinois since 1996, an indication of how old I am, and also where I sit politically. This election cycle, I didn't find any major candidate that was worthy of my vote. No disrespect, but that was my conclusion. Plus, I'm in a state where my vote doesn't matter, along with 42 other state residents, or residents of 42 other states. So I've always thought it's my obligation to make a political point by saying, the candidates the two parties are serving up just aren't worthy of my vote. So I've been protest voting in the state of Illinois, knowing that my vote would never make a difference voting in the two major candidates. I've been doing that for a long, long time. So I don't approach prediction markets with a political ideology, and I think that helps a lot because it makes it easier just to focus on the data. And the data that got me off on the right track was the registration shift data. We talked about it. I pulled some of it up to have it again in front of me. In the state of Pennsylvania, which we knew was going to be a key state, in 2020, Democrats, registered Democratic voters outranked registered Republican voters by 800,000. That number was cut to 300,000 going into election eve. 500,000 voter shift in the state of Pennsylvania. If that wasn't a harbinger, I don't know what would be. You could point to the same thing. Georgia, Michigan, and Wisconsin voters don't register by party. So we didn't have the benefit of that data in those swing states. But in all the others, in North Carolina, in Arizona, and even Nevada, there was a distinct and material shift in voter registration. And it's become a trend. It's been a quiet trend. You don't hear a lot about it, but more people over the last 4-year cycle have registered as Republicans than Democrats, and the ranks of registered Democrats have fallen. And that's clearly had an impact. And then, of course, there were some demographic shifts that have been noted in exit polling among predominantly males, Hispanic and Black males, and the under 30 vote is what really surprised me. I would not have called that would have been a shift in Trump's direction, but it indeed was on a net basis over the last 4 years. But the key metric that I think influenced most of my prediction market wagers were the voter registration shifts that we saw in the states that were printing that data.
You mentioned that there were some significant shifts here. That people have seen the New York Times map that shows the voter swing. But in terms of demographic shifts, every single demographic effectively went more towards Trump this cycle, except for 65 plus and white college women. If it was white non-college men, white non-college women, white, male, 45 to 64, white college men, female, white college, 18 to 29, Hispanic, Asian, or Black. Republican margin increased across the board. Almost every single state, the Republican margin was bigger, except for Washington and Utah. In terms of the shift among the votes, in 2020, Trump wins voters that make more than $100,000, 54 to 52. In 2024, Harris wins those voters 54 to 45.
I didn't see that. Can you repeat that one more time?
In 2020, Trump wins voters making more than $100,000 by a margin of 54 to 48. In 2024, Harris wins voters over $100,000 of income, 54 to 45.
So you really see this major shift of the Democratic Party becoming more elite and less the party of the working class. That clearly, in fact, I heard Victor and Tom having a similar discussion. It was a spirited conversation that a lot of kudos to Victor. I think he called some of that right in terms of how he is analyzing the election. But well,
the bottom is even more profound, Jeff. 2020, Biden wins voters making less than $50,000 a year, 55 to 45. Trump wins them 49 to 48 this year. So that is a big, big, big shift. In terms of how it moves other political markets moving forward, right? I think reflexively, if you are probably left-leaning or you're a liberal, you're in a dark place the last 2 days. Just like Republicans were probably in a dark place after 2020, or they were in a dark place after 2008, right? Anytime the other party runs the board and gets a trifecta, you're feeling pretty down. For the people that are betting out there right now and thinking that this is some permanent shift and single thing coming up is going to be GOP moving forward, I'd remind everyone that in 2017, the country's mood started to shift back to the left. Just like after 2020, the country's mood shifted to the right.
That's what the midterms are for. That's right.
You're a little bit older than I am, so you probably have a more salient memory of this than I do. But in 2004, after George W. Bush won the trifecta, won the popular vote, also wins the Electoral College, if someone told you that a junior senator from Illinois with the last name Hussein, or middle name Hussein, was going to be president of the United States in 4 years' time, you would have said, what are you talking about? So America ebbs and flows in each direction. I wouldn't bet anything on House control after like the 2026 midterms. If that market popped up here today, there's nothing that tells me that we would have any indication that the results today would make me confident placing a bet with that kind of duration tomorrow. But there are more betting markets that are going to be popping up as it pertains to the Trump, we could say the inauguration, as it were. Will Elon Musk have a place in the cabinet? Will Steve Mnuchin be back as Treasury Secretary? Will RFK run HHS moving forward? We don't see those up here yet. So hopefully next week on the prediction trade, we'll be able to talk about those because Tariq Mansour told you they're getting them ready. They're going to be up on Kalshi sometime soon.
I will mention, if you're looking for something, like I said, you've got some cash. And of course, the real game is in the markets, particularly the options markets that we talk about all day long on tastylive. But if you've got some money sitting over at Kalshi, or you're looking for something to have fun with, there's the Grammys coming up. We have a columnist called the Rock Hound who's been doing rock and roll music reviews for the last 5 years. Her name is Kendall. And Kendall has always done Grammy predictions, and there's now forecasting markets on Kalshi for who the nominees will be. So in the newsletter that we just shared, and it's on the luckboxmagazine.com site, who will be the Grammy nominees, she outlined what her best bets are. And as a result of that, I have some money on Sabrina Carpenter right now, and I couldn't even name one of it. Well, no, I can name her song because I bet it's called Please, Please, Please by Sabrina Carpenter. But I've taken some of Kendall's bets, the Rockhound, because she's pretty good at forecasting the music industry. So there are some fun things to do on Kalshi in the interim.
There will definitely be some fun things to do on Kalshi in the interim. Personally, I was looking at the Fed decision today as a really fascinating market that's popped up here as well.
Will December market's up already. What do you think?
And you know what? Will the Fed cut by 25 basis points? I would say that this answer is probably a no today. I would say that after the Fed meeting today, we could probably pencil that in as a no with the higher expected value.
I agree completely. Yep.
And you have a 25% probability on the board there, risking 25 cents to make a buck, with the Fed telling us that they probably want to wind down the path of their rate cuts, or at least think about what slowing down looks like. Listen, this is not politics per se, but if we want to talk about the summary of economic projections, about half the Fed said they only wanted one more rate cut in 2024 after they cut by 50 basis points in September. So we've already had one cut. We had that today. Moving forward, the unemployment rate's still 4.1%. Stock markets are at all-time highs. Unless you get a string of bad labor market data between now and then, there is enough of a reason to think that maybe the Fed doesn't need a cut in December and can just wait a meeting or so to do its next one. And that's the market I'm watching the most right now.
And I agree. And don't ignore the soundbite from today too, is that we're not done battling inflation yet. So I think you can't ignore that. You can't ignore that, and I think that looks like a really compelling play on Kalshi right now.
Now, given the Fed press conference today, I don't know if it's a market is up just yet, but I imagine it's going to be a point of interest. I would keep my ear to the ground for a market as to whether or not Trump will replace Jerome Powell as Fed chair before the end of his term. A lot of people on Trump's transition team want him gone. Trump has apparently said he'll let him stick around until May 2026. Powell today said if Trump tries to remove him, he's not leaving. So that sets up a very interesting dynamic between the head of the Fed and the president, and we may very well see a betting market pop up that speaks to whether or not Trump gets rid of Powell before May 26.
There is a Powell market up right now.
There's a Powell market
there is
now?
A Powell market in Kalshi.
These guys are too good, Jeff. They already have it listed.
They've got the game going.
Oh, my gosh. I checked it earlier before we got on the show, and I didn't see it up yet. These guys are too good.
No, I'd seen it earlier this morning too. But so you know, one of the other things.
Excellent.
There it is, right there.
There it is.
Powell out his chair before 2026.
And those odds dropped from about 45% to 19% now over the past few days. So the press conference is moving some of these things. It's a very lightly traded market right now. There's obviously not a ton of volume in here, 14,000 of trading volume. But you know what? There are other opportunities. I think that's going to be the point. And that's the evolution of the prediction trade moving forward here, Jeff. We're out of politics season, and you've done this for a number of years. So I guess we could spend the rest of the time here. Why don't you tell the audience, what can they expect from us in the prediction trade? What will we be discussing moving forward now that the election's over?
Well, over the last 4 years of the prediction trade, between political seasons, like midterms and general elections, we brought on horse race handicapping experts for the Kentucky Derby and the Belmont Stakes. We brought on one of the most successful cricket and snooker bettors in the world who was on with us. We have brought on tennis pros talking about the U.S. Open. We had baseball experts and handicappers going into the World Series, going over gimmick bets. And we'll do more of the same. You know, our old motto was if you can bet on it, you can bet we're going to talk about it on the prediction trade. But I think the political markets are going to keep us busy going forward. There are popularity markets that used to be very robust on predicted. The old timers on predicted, remember the markets that were the wildest markets were the approval markets and the tweet markets. So the approval markets were what the approval rating would be as of a certain date. They did those every week. on Real Clear Politics using the average or 538 approval markets, presidential approval markets. So I expect to see those returning and being more robust after a period of time. Remember, suddenly now there's a couple 100,000 people that have money on the Kalshi platform, and got hooked already on the idea of betting on the outcomes of economic and political events. So you could expect that there's going to be more of that. But the tweet markets were extraordinary. I don't expect to see them. And remember, it was based on when Trump was tweeting all the time using his presidential account. And it was actually a count of how many tweets he would do on a weekly basis in tranches. Would it be 50 to 75? Would it be 75 to 80? And those markets were wild because sometimes he would tweet 12 times a day. The tweet storms of the past at midnight till 2 in the morning. It was actually kind of a fun, kind of reckless environment. But I don't think we'll see the return of tweet markets, but we will see more markets associated with Trump moves and initiatives. You'll see something about tariffs, I'm certain. You'll see more about EV sales and EV mandates, perhaps. You'll see things about budget cutting and the budget. And you'll probably see some things about not about military conflicts, because Kalshi will always avoid that. They won't do anything with respect to a death count. They didn't do it in COVID. They're not going to do that and go near that. But there will be things about NATO engagement, military engagement. That's all likely to come in the near future. We'll be talking about them on the prediction trade.
Well, speaking of our listeners here on the prediction trade, let me give you some insight into how folks like you are doing here in the betting world. There's not many companies that produce results as it pertains to betting and predictions, but one of those companies is DraftKings. And DraftKings cut its full year guidance because of customer-friendly sport outcomes. Their customer base is just too smart. They're doing a good job making money. They're placing the right bets, which is why we end every single episode of the prediction trade with the following moniker, right, Jeff? We say, thank you for tuning in. Remember to wager responsibly, believe in your math, master your trades, and join us next time on the prediction trade, because our audience is smart, they're sharp, and they're here to win. And we're going to see everyone again next week.